In front of the entire staff, Billionaire, Olivia Harper threw a folder across the conference table and stared at Ryan Carter, her best strategist and a single father. She smirked. "You think anyone out there would pay you what I pay you if you're so good? Quit. I dare you." "You won't." Minutes later, Ryan calmly picked up a paper box and began clearing his desk one item at a time. Olivia's smile faded. For the first time, fear crept into her chest. What could make the quiet man finally walk away? The Harper Group occupied the top 11 floors of a glass tower downtown. And everyone who worked there understood the rules without being told. You arrived early, you left late, and you never made Olivia Harper look like the second smartest person in the room. For most of the staff, this was simply the price of a good salary. For Ryan Carter, it had become something closer to a daily discipline, a way of swallowing what he thought and doing the work anyway. Because the work was the one thing no one could take from him. Ryan was 38, and he had spent almost 7 years turning other people's failing ideas into things that made money. He was the man they called when a launch was 2 weeks from collapse. When a client threatened to walk when the numbers stopped adding up and no one wanted to say so out loud. He did not raise his voice and he did not chase credit. He simply solved the problem quietly and then moved on to the next one. And over time the whole building had come to lean on him without quite admitting it. The people who worked beside him knew exactly what he was worth. Daniel Brooks, who sat 2 desks over and had learned half of what he knew from watching Ryan work, liked to say that the company ran on 2 engines, and only one of them showed up on the org chart. It was a joke, but nobody laughed at it as though it were only a joke. They had all seen the pattern too many times to pretend it was luck. Olivia had seen it, too, and that was precisely the problem. She had built her fortune out of nothing anyone had handed her, clawing her way up through rooms full of men who assumed she would fail. And somewhere in that long climb, she had decided that a company was only as strong as the person at the very top. A star employee to her was not an asset. He was a risk. He was proof that the machine could run without her hand on every lever. And she had spent too many years being underestimated to ever let herself be replaceable again. So she watched Ryan the way a person watches a rival she cannot yet fire, and she made certain he understood his place. She had a particular contempt for the fact that he was raising a household alone, though she never named it directly. In her mind it made him predictable. A man with that kind of weight on his shoulders did not gamble. Did not walk away from a paycheck. Did not risk anything. He endured. And a man who endured, she believed, could be pushed as far as she cared to push him. For years, she had tested that theory in small, deliberate ways. She would strip his name off a proposal and present his strategy as her own instinct. She would let him carry a project to the finish line and then thank the junior staff for the win in front of him. She would correct him on points he had never gotten wrong, just to watch whether he would argue. And when he didn't argue, she took his silence as confirmation that she had read him correctly all along. Ryan absorbed it the way he absorbed everything, without a visible crack. He told himself the same thing every morning on the drive-in, that the money mattered more than the pride, that there were obligations at home that made his own feelings a luxury he could not currently afford. It was a reasonable thing to tell himself. It had kept him steady through a divorce, and through the slow, grinding years of rebuilding a life on one income, and it had never once failed to get him through the door. But reasonable things wear thin when they are repeated for too long, and lately he had begun to notice the cost of them. He noticed it in the way the younger staff had stopped expecting fairness, having learned by his example that talent was something you gave away for free in that building. He noticed it in the tiredness that had nothing to do with the hours. He noticed it most on the days he did his best work, because those were the days Olivia seemed most determined to prove that his best was worth nothing. The breaking point, when it came, wore the disguise of an ordinary Tuesday. There was a client account worth close to $4 million in annual revenue and had been quietly falling apart for a month while the assigned team insisted everything was under control. It wasn't under control. The client was 3 days from signing with a competitor. And the only reason anyone knew that at all was because Ryan had spent 2 sleepless nights reading between the lines of emails no one else had bothered to read. He rebuilt the entire proposal from the ground up. He caught the pricing error that had insulted the client in the first place, restructured the deliverables, and personally drafted the recovery pitch that Olivia would deliver. He did it without being asked and without expecting thanks, because by then he had stopped expecting thanks. He did it because the alternative was watching a good account die out of pride, and that was a thing he had never learned how to tolerate. The pitch worked. The client stayed. The contract was saved, and for a few hours, the floor had the particular energy of people who knew they had just dodged a disaster. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder and told him he had pulled a rabbit out of a hat again, and Ryan let himself feel for a moment that maybe this time it would be acknowledged for what it was. Olivia called a meeting the next morning to celebrate the win. The conference room filled with the leadership team and a good portion of the staff. Everyone pleased, everyone waiting for the account to be held up as an example of what the company could do. Ryan sat near the middle of the table, not at the head, and he told himself he did not need his name spoken aloud. He only needed the thing to be true, and it was true. And that would have been enough. Olivia stood at the front and walked the room through the save as though she were narrating a film about her own instincts. She described how she had seen the danger early, how she had known the pricing was wrong, how she had directed the recovery. She used the word we in the way powerful people use it when they mean I. And every version of the story she told removed one more of Ryan's fingerprints from the works until by the end of it he had become a set of hands that had typed what she dictated. He might have let even that pass. He had let worse pass. But then someone from the client team asked honestly and without malice who had actually caught the pricing error because they wanted to send a note of thanks. It was a simple question with a simple answer, and the whole room knew the answer, and for one suspended second the answer hung in the air waiting to be spoken. Olivia smiled and said that these things were never about one person that she didn't believe in. Singling people out, that the strength of the Harper Group had always been that no one was irreplaceable. She said it looking directly at Ryan, and everyone understood that the last part had been aimed at him like a small, precise blade. Daniel's jaw tightened. Somewhere down the table, a chair creaked as someone shifted uncomfortable and said nothing. Ryan felt something in his chest go very still. It was not anger, or not only anger. It was the quiet arrival of a fact he had been refusing to look at for years. The fact that no amount of good work would ever be enough, because being seen was never what she intended to allow. He had been solving her problems in exchange for a respect that was never going to come, and he had called that arrangement a job. Olivia was not finished. Perhaps she read his stillness as the old submission and wanted to press her advantage, or perhaps she simply enjoyed the audience. She set both hands on the table and leaned forward, and her voice took on the light cutting tone she saved for moments when she wanted a lesson to land in front of witnesses. "Let's all be clear about something," she said, sweeping her eyes across the room before returning them to him. "Loyalty isn't the same as leverage. Some people confuse being useful with being important." She let the distinction settle. Ryan does good work. Ryan also knows exactly what a man in his position is worth on the open market, which is why Ryan is never going anywhere. Isn't that right? He did not answer at first, and the silence stretched long enough that a few people looked down at their hands. Then she pushed the folder in front of her a few inches across the table, a gesture of dismissal. More than anything, and delivered the line she had clearly been saving. "You think anyone out there would pay you what I pay you?" she said. "If you're so good, quit. I dare you." "You won't." The room did not breathe. It was one thing to belittle a man's contribution and another to stand in front of 40 people and dare him to leave. And even the leadership team seemed to understand that she had stepped over some line that could not be easily stepped back across. Olivia, for her part, looked entirely certain. She had run the numbers on him 1,000 times in her head. A man with obligations, a single income, a mortgage, a life built on the reliability of that paycheck. He would flush. He would go quiet. He would stay. They always stayed. Ryan looked at her for a long moment, and what she saw in his face was not what she expected. There was no flush, no scramble, no fear. There was something almost like relief, the expression of a man who has finally been given permission to stop pretending. He gathered the papers in front of him into a neat stack, squared the edges out of habit, and stood. "All right," he said. Just that, 2 words even, and unhurried. And then he walked out of the conference room while it was still silent behind him.